Hey everyone, we are continuing to build our team over here at the CyberWire, and we are looking to add to our marketing team. If you are a creative, results-oriented marketer or know someone who is, we'd love to talk to you. Passionate about podcasting and cybersecurity too? Well, that's even better. Find out more at thecyberwire.com/careers. And now, a message from our sponsor, CyberReason. Cybersecurity defenders don't fear ransomware, they end it. With CyberReason, defenders detect and stop ransomware that even others miss. A promise backed by their $1 million breach warranty. At CyberReason, they don't fear ransomware, they end it. Learn more at cyberreason.com.
Ransom EXX threatens to release stolen proprietary data. Some looks at the C2C market, the criminal division of labor, and a splashy Carter marketing ploy. Misconfigured Salesforce communities expose organizational data. Our guest is Ron Brash from Verve International on a CISA advisory regarding GE ICS equipment. Ben Yellen on the proposed U.S. Bureau of Cyber Statistics. Huawei faces sanctions-induced headwinds. Mexico's investigation of Pegasus abuse continues, but so far without arrests or resignations. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Elliot Peltzman, filling in for Dave Bittner, with your CyberWire summary for Tuesday, August 10th, 2021. The Ransom EXX gang, recently active against targets in many countries, is threatening to leak sensitive information it stole during its ongoing extortion of hardware manufacturer Gigabyte. Computing reports. The data are claimed to be proprietary, with many of them under non-disclosure agreements. The attack caused Gigabyte to shut down some of its operations last week. Bleeping Computer saw the ransom note, which said, in part, quote, "We have downloaded 112 gigabytes of your files and we are ready to publish it. Many of them are under NDA." End quote. Screenshots of 4 documents said to be under an NDA were provided to show that the thieves had the goods they claimed. A study by the cyber intelligence shop at Insights sketches the criminal-to-criminal market and why it exists in the first place. Truly vertical integration is as rare in the underworld as it is in legitimate markets. No gang is likely to be able to do it all, hence the emergence of affiliate programs, initial access brokers, and so on. Insight's white paper says, quote, "These underground criminal websites are key enablers for both buyers and sellers. On one hand, they enable buyers with fewer skills or resources to obtain raw materials, with which to construct criminal enterprises, including malware, other malicious tools, illicit infrastructure, and compromised data, accounts, and payment card details. This accessibility lowers barriers to entry into the criminal ecosystem for actors who might otherwise lack necessary skills or resources, but have the money to make investments. On the other hand, these websites enable actors with more skills and resources to monetize the fruits of their labor and convert their attacks or other malicious activities into profits." End quote. The criminal-to-criminal fora are polyglot, but the Russophone sites appear to be the leaders. Insights writes, quote, "The Russian-language forums tend to have the most unique and sophisticated offerings, and often display higher standards of professionalism. English-language forums include not only North American and other native Anglophone criminals, but also non-native speakers of English from around the world, including former British colonies. Other language-specific forums serve geographically concentrated communities, such as the Romanian speakers of Romania and Moldavia, and the Portuguese speakers of Brazil, both of which are also significant hubs for cybercrime. Forums also exist in other widely spoken languages, such as Spanish and German." End quote. The initial access brokers form a thriving subsector of the criminal economy, and buying access makes economic sense to the criminal gangs who are the purchasers. The C2C marketplace also sees a range of marketing ploys. All World Cards, a relative newcomer to the carding market, the underworld market where paycard information is traded, is seeking to make a name for itself by dumping about 1 million stolen cards online. Bleeping Computer reports that Livorno-based security firm D3 Lab has looked at the dump and believes about half of the cards are current and valid, which is an unusually high fraction for any carder offering. And security company Cyber told Bleeping Computer that the data on offer includes credit card numbers, expiration dates, CVVs, names, countries, states, cities, addresses, zip codes for each credit card, and email addresses or phone numbers. The criminal buyers of Carter services seem to have been favorably impressed by the marketing ploy, and so all World Cards will probably bear watching. To Interpol, Europol, the FBI, and other law enforcement authorities, we simply say, good hunting. Security firm Varonis has found exposed Salesforce communities accessible to the Internet. The exposures are the result of misconfigurations. The data at risk includes such things as customer lists, support cases, and employee email addresses. If such a misconfiguration is detected and exploited, what would the consequences be? Varonis says, quote, at a minimum, a malicious actor could exploit this misconfiguration to perform recon for a spear phishing campaign. At worst, they could steal sensitive information about the business, its operations, clients, and partners. End quote. There's also the possibility of lateral motion from the Salesforce account into other services that the organization has integrated with their Salesforce account. The US continues its efforts to persuade friendly governments to avoid Huawei-manufactured equipment. Reuters describes a recent US approach to Brazil, during which the US observed that Huawei's supply chain difficulties would end up with it leaving Brazil's telecommunications infrastructure high and dry. Those supply chain difficulties, of course, have been induced by worldwide concern over the security risks Huawei equipment may carry with them. And, of course, due to US sanctions that have restricted Huawei's access to the technology it needs to develop and produce its products. China's embassy in Brazil has protested what it characterized as American smears and coercion. The state-run media outlet Global Times says the embassy put it this way, quote, we express strong discontent and vehement objection to such behaviors of publicly coercing and intervening in other countries' 5G construction and sabotaging normal China-Brazil cooperation. End quote. The Washington Post and Security Week both have overviews of how Apple's child protection initiatives have prompted a resurgence in the crypto wars. We'll have more notes on the current engagement in this afternoon's pro-policy briefing. Mexican prosecutors continue to investigate their country's corner of the NSO scandal, seeking to determine who authorized using Pegasus intercept tools against ordinary citizens and government critics. Reuters reports that so far there's no joy, they've come up with no arrests and prompted no firings. Watchdog organizations have been critical of the investigation's progress, complaining that the office conducting the probe is effectively itself implicated in the use of Pegasus. The investigators point out that it's a difficult and complicated investigation. Ricardo Sanchez Perez del Pozo, head of the Special Prosecutor for Crimes Against Freedom of Expression, defending his investigative team, said they were close to bringing the first case to court. He told Reuters, quote, this is a really complex investigation. It has advanced significantly, end quote. Mexico was the first significant international Pegasus customer, spending $160 million on the intercept tool since 2011. And finally, a quick reminder that it's Patch Tuesday. Expect fixes to be issued throughout the day.
And now, a word from our sponsor, Barracuda. A year ago, your business may have been part of that massive shift to remote working employees. Ever since, cybercriminals have been working overtime. Now, they're leveraging activity around the COVID vaccine to disguise phishing attacks, hoping to steal money or personal information. That can cost you customers hundreds of thousands of dollars and your reputation in the marketplace. Your email gateway is good for stopping viruses, but you're defenseless against targeted attacks like phishing, account takeover, and hijacking. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner is a free tool you can use right now to help protect your employees, your business, and your customers. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner analyzes your Office 365 accounts and identifies malicious emails that slipped past your gateway. Find the cybersecurity threats that are hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Use the Barracuda Email Threat Scanner for free at barracuda.com/cyberwire. That's barracuda.com/cyberwire. And we thank Barracuda for sponsoring our show. Ron Brash is Director of Cybersecurity Insights at Verve Industrial Protection. I caught up with him recently for his reaction to a CISA advisory regarding ICS equipment from General Electric. So today we're going to be talking about this new CISA advisory regarding the GE ICS equipment. Can we start off with just some high-level stuff here? Can you give us a little brief overview of what we're talking about?
Sure. So, I mean, there was four different organizations involved here. There was Idaho National Labs. There was SCADA-X. There was, and when I say Idaho National Labs, it's like the Citrix program. And then you have Biometric. And obviously, there's a lot of people that went into, a lot of thinking that went into making this collection of vulnerabilities. But actually, what it does is it affects a large number of products that share very similar firmware to each other. That accounts for a big portion of the energy industry's relays. But they're not just limited to the energy industry, because you can make energy anywhere, or you run a turbine or a generator. And so these type of devices, these protective relays, are used all over the place, not just for, for example, in windmills or next to a coal turbine, but they're used even, for heating the water in a mine in a remote area. It's not your typical GE product demographic, but that could be a potential use case of it. So there's a bunch of vulnerabilities there that affect what largely looks like third-party components, right? There's things with, the ciphers that are used for communication over SSH, for example. You also have issues with the web server that's running on the device and how it parses traffic. And then there's other functionalities such as that we call first-tier OEM software, right? That can push firmware to the device, and there's no integrity checking upon it. And then there's also there's some bootloader problems there too. So there's a whole gamut of vulnerabilities in this release.
And so what are the opportunities for folks to mitigate the issues here?
Well, the good news is that GE did the right thing and said, hey, we do provide firmware updates, right? That's a great step by a vendor. Unfortunately, instead of just saying like, hey, we're going to end the life of the product, you should move to a newer one, the updates don't apply to all of the firmware of all of these devices. So there's 14 different CPU revisions for this device, which would make sense, right? It's lived a long time. It's over many different products. There's just different hardware inside of each of them. And there's only firmware really available for 4 of those 14 different CPUs. Now, I'd say there's all of the fixes are unique, right? There's different versions of firmware for all of them, but there is some gaps there. So if I were to say, go update your devices when it's appropriate, that works if you can. But if you can't, right, you want to make sure that you've locked down the devices to a set of least functionality or least principal features that are available to the device. So, an example, if you have the option of turning off the web server, do it, right? Like if you're not using it, that would make sense. The bootloader vulnerabilities, watch for weird things at startups, right? Prevent them from physical access. The vulnerability for that one was actually a bit misquoted, not one I can speak to much more. But the other ones, limit the access to them, make sure they're on isolated networks, make sure the systems speaking to them are speaking to them in a secure manner and are secure themselves. It's your general boilerplate cybersecurity, remediation strategies. But in particular, because these devices are used in critical infrastructure and in a very critical in function type situations, we really need to engineer out the risks by doing all of the things that I just mentioned.
And to what degree will the folks who are working with this particular type of equipment be aware that, first of all, they're working with this kind of equipment and that potentially they have an issue here?
Well, probably one of the first indicators that you'd have this device, I mean, assuming that you knew nothing about your inventory of assets out there in the field, one of the things that they'll probably do is to look through, hey, which OEM software tools that we have, right? So that could be the Enter Vista series. And for each of these products, they have their own installers. But you want to find out what you're using and where it's being used from. So they're probably going to say, okay, we know we got some GE relays out back. Hey, let's pull up the specs or log into the technician laptop or something and see if that OEM software is there. If you see it there, chances are then you know that you have at least one of these devices out there in the field. So that would give you a good indicator of, okay, I have a problem. Let's go figure out how many devices I have. The other thing is many of these devices are in their most insecure deployment schema, if you will. There's a bunch of reasons for that. Part of it's integrators didn't harden them. The customer didn't require it. These options are there, but no one used it because it had some sort of idiosyncrasy where it didn't work under a certain situation. There's plenty there for a vendor to get started, even without a firmware update. And then what they want to do is to make sure that those devices are secure within their premises and also within their particular network zones as well.
How do you see things playing out as we go forward in terms of this being an ongoing issue?
This will absolutely be an ongoing issue. Vulnerabilities will continue to be created, right? Not created, discovered is probably a better term.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, what you need to do is to think about a consequence, engineer out the risk, consequence-based engineering, right? To quote Andy Bachman and INL. You're going to have to think more about that. You're going to have to think that almost all embedded devices are vulnerable. So what do I do to get that risk down to a level that I'm comfortable with? And to do that, you'll have to think about compensating controls right off the bat and try to really limit the connections to these devices. One option might people will say, well, let's not have any Ethernet, functionality. Let's go back to the old analog and serial ways. There's a reason why we got away from that. And so I don't see that as a particularly good option. But one option could be for asset owners to start leveraging more of the secure deployment guidelines that are produced by vendors and forcing their integrators, forcing the persons that are installing this gear to actually adhere to them and actually testing whether or not someone actually did the work, right? Instead of just saying they did so. I think that there'll be more focus on that of secure deployments moving forward. But a lot of these devices are legacy devices or legacy deployments. And so we're doing cleanup at the moment.
That's Ron Brash from Verve Industrial Protection. It's time to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor, LookingGlass, a global leader in cybersecurity. Just a quick glance at recent news reminds us that cyber threat actors are becoming more sophisticated, organized, and deliberate. The reputational, financial, and operational damages from these attacks are increasing at a truly alarming rate. How is your organization ensuring that your defenses stay a step ahead of the cyber attacks? LookingGlass can help you tailor your threat intelligence to ever-changing attack vectors and adversaries. Tailored threat models help your security team work smarter, more efficiently, and proactively to optimize your cybersecurity investments. Find out how your organization can develop customized threat models at lookingglasscyber.com/CyberWire. And we thank LookingGlass for sponsoring our show. And joining me once again is Ben Yellen. He's from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security and also my co-host over on the Caveat podcast. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
Interesting article. This is from the folks over at Federal News Network. This one's written by Jory Heckman, and it's titled National Cyber Director, Bureau of Cyber Statistics Needed to Understand the Threat Landscape. What's going on here, Ben?
So this article leads off with a great hook. I did not know about this historical fact, but in the early days of the U.S. Post Office, when Benjamin Franklin was Postmaster General, he gave local postmen at the time a task to jot down the local weather conditions, mail them back to headquarters on a postcard so that they could aggregate information. Because Benjamin Franklin rightly realized that weather in one area didn't exist in a vacuum. And you could understand more about, the meteorological conditions in this country by collecting a wide array of data. To circle that back to something that's relevant to us, what the National Cyber Director, Chris Inglis, said at a recent meeting is that we need to engage in a similar sort of effort as it relates to cyber threats. We need to know, in his words, which way the winds are blowing. So his idea is to stand up what would be called a Bureau of Cyber Statistics. This would require an act of Congress. It would be housed within the Department of Homeland Security. And they would be tasked with collecting, analyzing, and publishing data on cybersecurity, cybercrime, and threats. One thing that's interesting to me is these are the type of statistics that have been so valuable to us in a pandemic. We've been collecting them in the public health realm. Obviously, we haven't been doing a good enough job collecting that data.
Right.
But to get a full understanding to get a full threat assessment, what are the conditions out there? What are the variants of concern that are going to increase infections? What are problem areas of the country where we're seeing surges in hospitalizations? We have, through the CDC, set up a centralized system where we can collect data from states and localities, local hospital systems, to understand the threat landscape.
Right.
And right now, we don't have that in the cyber world. So this is not only an idea that's been pushed by Director Inglis, but it was also originally proposed in the Solarium Commission report, which is interesting because one of the other recommendations of the Solarium Commission report was to create the job that Mr. Inglis himself now holds. So Congress certainly has taken to heart some of those recommendations in the Solarium Commission report, and I think it would be wise of them to take this recommendation as well.
I've heard some folks compare this sort of thing to aviation, where, if you have an incident, you're obligated to report that incident, and then there will be an investigation. Could we see a similar sort of effort? I mean, could something like that be rolled into this organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the idea is here, is you're collecting disparate information on individual circumstances and trying to aggregate it so that you get a better picture of the threat landscape. And we see that in law enforcement tools that are used at the local level, where you're collecting information on the location of crime, high crime, certain characteristics of neighborhoods that lead to more violent crime. Now, obviously, we can question the accuracy of those tools, but the idea is each piece of disparate information is not collected in a vacuum. You have to have some sort of central location where it's stored and analyzed so that you can identify the next threat potentially before it comes to pass.
I guess so. What I'm getting at, though, is also the obligation to report. Because we hear, folks are reticent to report ransomware incidences, for example, because of they don't want the bad PR that could come from that with their customers.
In an ideal world, there would be an obligation to report. That might not be as politically tenable. I still think creating this Bureau of Cyber Statistics would be valuable, even if there wasn't a legal obligation to report.
Right.
Because a lot of entities would still voluntarily report. If they're less concerned about their own liability, or if they're sure they're not going to be held liable, or they're not going to suffer reputational damage from being the victim of a cyber attack, they may see value in a broader effort to aggregate information and try and protect our networks for the future. So I think it can still work even in the absence of mandatory reporting. And I think the article makes that clear. We're not always going to collect every piece of relevant data. The more data we can aggregate, the better. So, I think as long as we recognize that this is going to be an imperfect system, I don't think that should stop us from setting up a system that would perform that role.
All right. Well, again, the article is from the Federal News Network. It's titled National Cyber Director, Bureau of Cyber Statistics Needed to Understand Threat Landscape. Ben Yellen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible. Could your company benefit by reaching our large and influential audience? Send us a note at thecyberwire.com/sponsor.
And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. And for professionals and cybersecurity leaders who want to stay abreast of this rapidly evolving field, sign up for CyberWire Pro. It will save you time and keep you informed. Listen for us on your Alexa smart speaker too. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technology. Our amazing CyberWire team is Trey Hester, Puru Prakash, Justin Sabi, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilby, and I'm Elliot Peltzman filling in for Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. When it comes to mitigating the impact of a security incident, minutes matter. So the question is, how long would it take your organization to detect a ransomware attack? The answer could be the difference between business as usual and devastating consequences to your customers, bottom line, and reputation. Learn how the Arctic Wolf platform and concierge security team can help your organization detect the undetectable, not in days or hours, but minutes. For the first time, take an exclusive look at how their experts investigated, escalated, and remediated a real-life ransomware attack on a local government organization. Visit arcticwolf.com/cyberwire to check out on-demand webinars, an interactive timeline, and find resources to help you learn how to continually improve your security posture over time. With Arctic Wolf, stop breaches before they disrupt business. Explore real-world examples at arcticwolf.com/cyberwire. And we thank Arctic Wolf for sponsoring our show.